Maggie Hale never imagined that her twilight years would begin like this, standing awkwardly in the foyer of her son's designer home, clutching a foil-covered lemon pound cake that was still warm. She had baked it that morning, thinking it might bring a little warmth to a meeting she'd been dreading all week. A family dinner, they called it. A conversation about the future, now that her husband Roy was gone. But the way they said it, the clipped tone in Daniel's voice when he called, and the barely disguised tension in his wife Reese's texts, Maggie knew this wasn't just dinner. It was a reckoning. The ranch-style house was pristine, sterile, as though life had been staged in it, rather than lived. Maggie and Roy had co-signed the loan to help them buy it 6 years ago. At the time, she'd told Roy it would be a legacy. Helping them build their life is part of our job, she'd said. Roy wasn't sure. They need to build their own walls, Maggie. We just gave them the bricks. Now standing in the doorway, no one offered to take her coat. Reese was at the island with a wine glass, already in hand, tapping away on her phone. Daniel barely glanced up from his laptop on the dining table. Trevor, her younger son, was parked on the couch, with earbuds in his pregnant wife Liza, whispering into her phone beside him. Maggie hovered for a second, the pound cake starting to feel like a joke. She walked into the kitchen and gently set it down. I thought we could use something sweet. Reese didn't look up. We're trying to cut sugar. But thanks. The dismissiveness stung. The family gathered around the dining table. 9 of them in total, including the grandkids, who barely glanced at her between swipes on their iPads. Daniel started the discussion without ceremony. So, we've been thinking it's time to simplify. Move things forward without excess. Excess, Maggie asked, keeping her voice light. Reese gave a small, tight smile without lifting her eyes from the phone. You know, extra steps, delays, unclear roles. Daniel cleared his throat. The trust needs active management now. Trevor and I are willing to take that on. It's just cleaner. Maggie looked at her boys' men, now mid-40s, both with gray sneaking into their temples, and barely recognized them. Have either of you spoken to Walter Barnes about Roy's final instructions? Reese scoffed, finally making eye contact. Maggie, you're just the widow. Maybe just sit and stay quiet. The words hit like a slap. Even Trevor chuckled nervously, not defending her, just avoiding eye contact. The air in the room shifted. Maggie felt every eye in the room glide over her like she was wallpaper. Not the woman who raised them, educated them, kept them alive when Roy worked double shifts. She wasn't family here. She was in the way. She placed her fork down without a word, stood up slowly, and walked to the door. No one followed. No one called out. The lemon pound cake sat untouched, still warm, still waiting to be shared. Back home, Maggie stepped into the silence of her kitchen. The lights were soft. The clock ticked louder than usual. She slipped off her shoes and walked into Roy's old study. It smelled faintly of aftershave and pencil lead, just like it always had. There was a drawer in the desk they used to call the vault. Maggie opened it with care. Inside was a white envelope labeled Maggie in Roy's handwriting. She held it for a moment, her breath stuck in her throat. Inside the envelope was a letter. The handwriting was neat, firm. It read, "If you're reading this, then they've already tried to cut you out. I knew it would happen. They're not cruel, but they're entitled. They've been watching and waiting, but I've taken steps. Everything our house, the accounts, the lake property, even the business shares are in your name now. They don't know. Don't tell them until you're ready. Walter has all the documents. You're in control. I did it this way, so you'd never be trapped by their judgment. You always had more strength than you believed. Now it's your turn. Love, Roy." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Behind the letter was a thick packet of legal documents, notarized transfers power of attorney declarations, property deeds. Her name was on everything. Maggie set the papers gently on the desk. She didn't pace. She didn't scream. She sat back in Roy's old leather chair and let the power of the moment wash over her. At 2:15 a.m., she picked up the phone and dialed Walter Barnes. "Walter, it's Maggie. I found the file. I want to make it official. Today." She didn't even flinch as she said it. Her voice was steel. Walter's voice sharpened instantly. "I'll be there by 9. Maggie hung up. She reached for Roy's photo on the shelf. His eyes smiled at her through the frame. "I've got this, Roy. I really do." Maggie Hale didn't wait for the dust to settle. She swept through it. By sunrise, she was already dressed and ready, her mind sharp, her steps steady. She wore her late husband Roy's favorite brooch, a small silver bird pinned to her collar, like a signal. Today wasn't about mourning. It was about reclaiming. Walter Barnes arrived exactly on time, his navy sedan rolling into her driveway, with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen too many families implode. He stepped out with his worn leather briefcase and a face etched by decades of secrets. Maggie opened the door before he knocked. "Coffee's on the stove," she said. Walter smiled. "You always did prepare better than most." They settled at her dining table, Roy's side still untouched, and laid out the papers like a chessboard. The documents Roy had tucked away were more than thoughtful. They were surgical. Full transfer, Walter confirmed. Assets, accounts, properties, even the business stake, all executed cleanly and locked down with your name as primary owner. Maggie studied the signatures, the seals, the date stamps. The weight of it didn't intimidate her, it clarified her. Walter slid a final document across the table. "Once you sign this, you'll have full authority. No more ambiguity." Her pen didn't hesitate. 6 signatures later, she had the legal equivalent of a sword in her hand. Walter dialed the estate manager on speaker. "Effective immediately," he said. "Margaret Hale holds sole authorization. Please update all records and systems." The voice on the other end confirmed. It was done. Maggie sat back, exhaled quietly, and looked toward the photo of her and Roy by the mantel. She didn't smile. She nodded like a soldier saluting her comrade after a battle neither had asked for. Walter closed his briefcase. "You want them to find out through the bank notices, or would you like to tell them Maggie stood gathering the signed documents into a folder? Let them feel it," she said. "Let it hit like a thunderclap." Walter chuckled softly. There she is. By the time he left, Maggie was already calling the title company her banker and the brokerage manager. No ceremony, just instructions. Clean, decisive, final. By noon, the estate Maggie had been told to stay out of was fully in her hands, and the ones who'd tried to erase her were about to realize the rules had changed. By sunset, Maggie had rehearsed her lines in the mirror 3 times, not because she needed to remember them, but to remind herself she could say them without her voice shaking. She packed the legal documents into a navy blue folder, clipped with a small brass clasp Roy always liked, and tucked it under her arm. No performance, no preamble, just truth plain and sharp. The drive to Daniel's house was quiet. She didn't play music. The hum of the tires and the occasional turn signal were the only sounds in the car. She pulled into the driveway right at 6:00 p.m., the same time they used to sit down to dinner when Daniel and Trevor were kids. From outside, she could already hear voices, laughter plates clinking, Reese talking too loudly. It sounded like a party. That made Maggie's chest tighten. They had no idea the foundation they were standing on was about to shift. She stepped out of the car and walked to the door without hesitation. No casserole dish this time, just facts. She rang the doorbell. Daniel answered with the same practiced smile he used on real estate clients. "Mom, we didn't think you'd come back so soon." Maggie didn't return the smile. She stepped past him into the house. In the living room, Trevor and Liza were lounging on the couch, both with drinks in hand. Reese was at the kitchen island, arranging a charcuterie board, like she was hosting a lifestyle segment on television. Lily, bless her, looked up from her phone and offered a small smile. Maggie nodded back. "I have something to share," she said. Reese rolled her eyes. "Maggie, we've already discussed the trust." "No, we haven't," Maggie said, placing the folder on the counter. "You've discussed how to shut me out. That's not the same thing." Reese opened her mouth to interrupt, but Maggie unclipped the folder and spread the documents like playing cards. "These are notarized," Maggie said, "certified, and legally binding." Daniel's face shifted first from confident to confused to cautiously concerned. He stepped forward, scanning the top document. "Mom, what is this?" "It's everything," Maggie replied. "Full ownership of the house, the business shares, the lake property, all assets, every account, all under my name. Roy made the changes over a year ago. You just didn't bother to ask." Trevor blinked slowly, putting down his drink. "Wait, you're saying there's no trust?" "There was," Maggie said. "Roy dissolved it. Quietly, legally. It was never meant to be permanent. He saw what was coming." Reese scoffed and walked over, snatching one of the pages. "There's no way this holds up. I mean, what lawyer would allow this?" "Walter Barnes," Maggie said, naming the one person in the room they all remembered from childhood birthdays and estate meetings. 35 years of legal history. He approved it, oversaw it, filed it. Liza looked toward Trevor, whispering something Maggie couldn't hear. He said nothing, just stared at the papers like they were written in a language he never learned. Daniel finally found his voice. "You should have talked to us first. You talked at me." Daniel, Maggie said, steady now. "You told me to stay quiet. Reese called me just the widow. That wasn't a mistake. That was your position." Reese crossed her arms. "Well, forgive me for assuming the family would have a say in the estate. Roy wouldn't have done this behind our backs unless you pressured him." Maggie stepped closer, her eyes locked on Reese's. "Roy did it because he saw who you were when you thought no one was looking." The room went silent. Lily whispered, "Grandma, is this really all yours now?" "Yes," Maggie said, turning to her. "And not because I tricked anyone. Because I protected what your grandfather built." Daniel was pacing now, fists clenching and unclenching. "So what now? You just control everything. You're what cutting us off." "I'm protecting it from rot," Maggie replied. "What happens next depends entirely on how you behave." Reese walked to the wine rack, poured a glass with shaky hands. "So this is it. You walk in, drop this on the table, and expect us to applaud you?" "I don't need applause," Maggie said, collecting the documents into the folder. "I need you to understand this. This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification." Trevor finally spoke. "And if we don't accept it?" Maggie looked him in the eye for the first time that night. Then you'll find out how much more I'm willing to take back. No one spoke. The entire room felt like it had been drained of oxygen. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "The next time you want to talk about my role in this family," she said without looking back, "you'll need an appointment." Then she stepped out into the cooling night, the folder tucked under her arm like armor, and didn't look back as the door closed behind her. By noon, the next day, Maggie was back in her kitchen stirring sugar into her tea, with a rhythm that matched her breath. She hadn't checked her phone once, not out of forgetfulness, but control. The night before had unfolded exactly as planned, and today, the consequences would take root. The first domino had fallen. She just needed to let gravity do its thing. At 12:17 p.m., the first message came. "Daniel, Mom, weird thing. The joint access account isn't letting me log in. You changed something?" Maggie didn't respond. By 12:45, another ping. "Reese, we're locked out of the lake house system. Alarm won't accept our code. Did something glitch?" Maggie sipped her tea. The locks had been changed at 8 a.m. after a quiet call to the estate manager. It wasn't a glitch. It was re-ownership. An hour later, her voicemail started filling up. Trevor left a message that sounded more annoyed than concerned. "Hey, so, I think something's wrong with the business account. Getting denied at the supplier portal. Just checking if you've heard anything from Walter." By 3:00 p.m., the group chat was firing off like a fire alarm. "Lisa can't access the SUV payment portal. Anyone else having issues? Daniel, this is serious now. I've got invoices bouncing. Walter isn't picking up. Trevor, can someone please say what's going on?" Maggie watched each line of text appear in real time, each one a little more frantic than the last. It was like listening to a symphony of discomfort. She walked into Roy's study and glanced at the framed photo of their wedding day. His suit too big, her smile too wide, both of them terrified but united. "It's happening," she whispered, "just like you knew it would." At 4:18 p.m., her cell rang again. Reese for the 4th time. Maggie didn't answer. She sat on the back porch with her tea and listened to the birds instead. At 4:33, Daniel texted directly. "Daniel, Mom, this isn't okay. I need to speak with you right now." Maggie didn't lift her phone. At 4:52, the tone changed. "Reese, what did you do?" "My name's being removed from the property tax notifications. I just got a call from our accountant. Are you seriously freezing us out?" Maggie chuckled quietly. Not out of cruelty, but satisfaction. That Reese finally realized it wasn't a bluff. By early evening, panic had settled into the family like fog. Maggie imagined the three of them pacing their expensive floors, calling accountants refreshing bank apps, whispering in corners of their oversized kitchens. For years, they'd been feeding off what Roy had built, what Maggie had nurtured, and they'd called it inheritance. They assumed it was inevitable. They never once asked what it cost. Now they were tasting scarcity. For the first time, Maggie was the one in the tower. She didn't revel in it, but she wasn't sorry either. At 5:10, Trevor tried again. "Trevor, I'm not like them. I didn't know this was happening. I thought Dad set everything up with Daniel. I never wanted to cut you out." Maggie read the message twice. She thought about responding. But then she remembered Trevor at the dinner table chuckling along when Reese told her to sit and stay quiet. His silence then was consent. She turned off the notifications. By dinner time, her landline rang an unfamiliar number. She picked up. "Mrs. Hale. This is Andrea from the vehicle leasing office. We received instructions this morning to update ownership on the white Escalade leased under Roy Hale's signature. We've confirmed the update to Margaret Hale. Just making sure you approve this." "I did," Maggie said. "That vehicle will be returned by end of week. If not, please arrange pickup." "Yes, ma'am." Click. Back at Daniel's house, they were likely still trying to piece it all together. Maggie could picture Reese pacing in her heels, Daniel throwing his phone on the couch, Trevor halfway to regret, and Maggie. She was cooking herself a full meal for the first time in weeks. Baked salmon, asparagus with lemon, the kind of dinner she used to serve on Sundays when the family still felt like family. As she plated her food, the doorbell rang. She peered through the window. Reese, alone, wearing oversized sunglasses like it was a disguise. She had a manila folder in hand, probably an apology dressed up in legal threats. Maggie didn't open the door. She waited. Reese stood there shifting from foot to foot, then finally shouted, "You don't have to do this. We're family." Maggie opened the window slightly and said, "That's what I thought, until you told me to be quiet in my husband's house." She closed the window. Reese stormed off without another word. Back at the table, Maggie raised a glass of wine to no one in particular and whispered, "To the calm after the storm, and to those learning what storms really cost." She took a sip and smiled not out of revenge, but recognition. They had underestimated the wrong woman. 3 days after Reese's failed doorstep ambush, Walter Barnes called with a tone Maggie hadn't heard since the days of Roy's diagnosis. It wasn't panic, but it was close. "Maggie," he said, "I need you to come to the office. Bring a clear head and your full attention." An hour later, she was seated across from him in the same mahogany-lined room where she and Roy had signed their first will on borrowed courage. Walter slid a heavy folder across the desk. Maggie opened it slowly. The first few pages were ordinary bank statements, vendor invoices, balance sheets from the family business Roy had once managed with quiet excellence. But as she flipped further, the numbers began to swell. $120,000 here, $75,000 there. A $300,000 equipment lease tied to a warehouse Maggie had never heard of. Every document bore Daniel's name. Every signature was styled like his, a little rushed, always slightly downhill, like he was racing himself. "What am I looking at?" Maggie asked, even though her stomach already knew. Walter sighed. "It's worse than we thought. These aren't just questionable withdrawals. Daniel took out business loans under the impression he was still a legal partner, but Roy removed him from partnership when he got sick." Maggie said, flipping back to the dissolution documents they'd signed with Walter over a year ago. "Exactly." Walter nodded. "Which makes these signatures fraudulent. The bank approved the loans because they believed Daniel still had authority, because he forged Roy's continued consent." Maggie froze. Her breath caught behind her teeth. He did this while Roy was sick. Walter nodded again, more solemn this time. The first loan dates back to 2 weeks after Roy's second chemo round. He was in no shape to sign anything. Maggie leaned back, the folder still open. Her eyes traced the date on one of the documents, July 14th. That same week, Roy had been too weak to eat solid food. Maggie had been spooning broth into his mouth like he was a child. While she was helping him walk to the bathroom, Daniel was stealing the floor out from under them. "Did Roy ever see these?" she asked quietly. Walter shook his head. "I don't believe he did. He left you a note in his tax binder, one line. Said Daniel's withdrawals look fishy. Ask Walter." I think he suspected, but he didn't have the strength to dig deeper. Maggie closed the folder. Her heart wasn't racing. It was steady, cold. "What happens now?" she asked. "I can initiate legal proceedings immediately," Walter said. "Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, abuse of power. It's serious, but the choice is yours. We can file, or we can leverage this quietly and dismantle Daniel's access piece by piece." Maggie stared at the window. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, a car honked at a red light. Life was continuing without pause, as if her world hadn't just cracked again. "He betrayed Roy," she said almost to herself. "He stole from a dying man." Walter didn't reply. He didn't have to. "I don't want him arrested yet," she said after a pause. "Let him sweat. Let him feel it unravel." Walter gave a slow, approving nod. "We'll start by revoking his credit extensions. Then we'll call the bank and flag the loan terms. I'll have my assistant draft the letters today." As she stood to leave, Maggie hesitated. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for this, just for staying loyal when everything else cracked." Walter gave her a rare, warm smile. "Roy trusted you to finish what he couldn't. You're doing exactly that." That evening, Maggie returned home and walked straight into Roy's study. She pulled down his old retirement binder, the one with sticky notes, faded receipts, and marginal scribbles from a time when paper still felt permanent. She flipped to the back to the page he always used for reminders. There it was, in his neat, slanted hand. "Daniel's withdrawals look fishy. Ask Walter." She traced the words with her finger. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew and trusted me to handle it." Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table. The fraud documents fanned out in front of her. Every signature, every dollar, every lie was a reminder of just how far her son had drifted. Not just morally, but humanly. She didn't recognize this man who had grown up in her home, learned to ride a bike on her street, kissed her cheek before school. She wasn't angry in the way most people are when betrayed. She was hollowed out, scraped clean of shock, filled instead with precision. She didn't need to scream. She just needed to act. She opened her planner and started listing every asset Daniel had touched. Every car title, every property, every account. What could be sold? What could be frozen? Who else had he dragged into this? By midnight, she had 3 new folders labeled Immediate Action Investigation and Firewood. Because that's what these records were now. Kindling. And the fire was only beginning. The barbecue invite arrived via group text, the same digital purgatory, where Maggie's children now communicated their guilt and fear. It was phrased like a peace-offering family cookout this Saturday. "Let's clear the air. Burgers and corn. Bring dessert if you want." She didn't reply. But on Saturday at precisely 3:00 p.m., Maggie pulled into Daniel's driveway. She wore her navy blue slacks, a crisp white blouse, and Roy's old wristwatch still ticking, like it had something to prove. In one hand, she carried a leather binder. In the other, a bottle of red wine none of them could afford anymore. The backyard was decked out like a forced celebration. Cheap folding chairs, red plastic cups, candles meant to look casual, but arranged too carefully to be accidental. Reese was wearing all white again, like she was trying to erase herself into purity. Daniel was by the grill, flipping burgers with exaggerated purpose. Trevor leaned against a post, nursing a drink, pretending to belong. Lily was seated near the fence, earbuds half in attention, split between her phone and the tension. Maggie stepped onto the patio like she owned it, because legally she did. No one greeted her. She didn't wait for an opening. She walked to the main table, placed the leather binder down with a gentle thud, and said clearly, "We need to talk. Now." Daniel looked up, the spatula frozen midair. Reese laughed, brittle and sharp. "Maggie, can we not ruin another afternoon?" Maggie didn't flinch. She unzipped the binder, pulled out a sheet, and held it up. "This is a notarized record of a loan Daniel took out using the business as collateral. Dated July 14th. Signed under Roy's name. Problem is, Roy had already removed Daniel as a partner, which makes this forgery." The air stilled. Trevor straightened slowly. Lisa put down her drink. Even the wind seemed to hush. Daniel stepped forward. "That's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like," Maggie said. "And I have 7 more just like it." She pulled out another paper, $70,000 pulled from the vendor account for a warehouse lease. $220,000 on equipment that never existed. Transactions made while Roy was battling cancer. While I was spooning broth into his mouth, you were signing papers in his name. Reese rushed forward, snatching one document, scanning with shaking hands. "This is a setup, a misunderstanding. Roy never told us about this because he didn't trust you to fix it," Maggie replied. "He barely had the strength to keep himself alive, and you were already counting his money." Trevor spoke for the first time. "Is this real?" he asked, voice low. Maggie looked at him. "Every page has a signature. Every signature has a date. You do the math." Daniel barked out a bitter laugh. "So what now? You're going to shame us into exile. You think you're better than us." Maggie stepped forward, laying one more document on the table, an email confirmation from the bank, alerting them of the flagged fraud. "No, Daniel, I think I'm the only one who didn't treat this family like a buffet line. And you didn't just betray me. You stole from your father's grave." Silence. The kind that chokes. The kind that rearranges a room forever. Reese's face crumpled. "You're bitter," she hissed. "That's all this is. You can't let go." Maggie turned to her eyes, cool. "No, I'm done letting go. I let go when I signed over the down payment for this house. I let go when I kept my mouth shut about the business debt. I let go when I brought a cake to dinner and got told to sit down. Now I'm holding on. Tight." Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear. Trevor had the decency to look ashamed. Lily, from her spot near the fence, watched her grandmother with wide, steady eyes. Maggie turned back to Daniel, her voice steady. "You'll start returning what's not yours. The furniture at the cabin, the Escalade, the vendor equipment, the lease on the downtown condo. You'll sign it over, or I'll let the banks drag you through hell." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You're going to burn the whole family down over paperwork." Maggie took a breath, then leaned in just slightly. "No. You did that the moment you put pen to paper and signed your father's name without his hand." She stepped back, zipped the binder, and turned toward the back gate. Behind her, the silence stretched like wire. Reese tried one last jab, voice shrill. "You're just a bitter old woman who doesn't know when to quit." Maggie stopped at the gate, didn't turn around. "I'm the woman who paid for this entire yard," she said clearly, "and I just decided you're not invited back into it." Then she walked out, the wine bottle still in hand, the binder under her arm, and her back straight as steel. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt right, and that was more than enough. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. Maggie found it wedged under her front door early Tuesday morning, the corner slightly bent from being shoved in haste. The handwriting on the front, Margaret Hale, was forced tight and uneven. She stared at it for a moment before slipping a butter knife under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal psychiatric referral. Red ink circled the words, "Capacity evaluation recommended," like a warning label. The document wasn't signed, but Maggie recognized the format. She'd seen it 100 times during her years as a school principal forms, used to challenge guardianship or authority. Only this time, it was her name listed as the one potentially unfit. She didn't feel fear, just insult. It was a slap clumsy and desperate. By noon, she was parked in Walter Barnes's office. The form spread across his desk like an open wound. "They're trying to challenge my mental fitness," she asked, voice flat. Walter adjusted his glasses and examined the form closely. "It's a fake. See this notary stamp sloppy placement. And this signature? This person hasn't been a licensed evaluator in this state for over 5 years." Maggie leaned back. So someone cobbled this together, hoping I'd panic. Walter looked up, his mouth tightening. This wasn't just a bluff. If this had been filed through probate even incorrectly, it could have triggered a temporary freeze. That's what they wanted, to stall your control long enough to siphon back whatever they could. Maggie shook her head slowly. "This reeks of Reese." Walter didn't argue. "Want me to trace it? Trace it. All of it." 2 days later, Walter called. His voice was clipped, energized. It was her. Reese approached a notary named Sandra Lohman. Owed her a favor, apparently. Tried to have the document backdated and signed without an actual exam. "Can you prove it?" She left an email trail, and the assistant turned everything over. She got spooked when Reese asked her to alter a state form. Maggie didn't hesitate. "File the charges." Walter's tone sharpened. "Forgery, fraud, attempted abuse of the court system. She'll be lucky if she walks away with a fine." That Friday, the sheriff's car pulled up in front of Daniel and Reese's home. Neighbors peeked through blinds as officers calmly knocked on the door. Reese stepped out in a silk robe, clutching a phone like it might protect her. The warrant was read. Her hands were cuffed. The robe flapped in the wind like a flag of surrender. Daniel tried to intervene, yelling something about misunderstandings and legal errors, but the officer shut him down with a flat palm to the chest. And a reminder: obstruction carries its own consequences. Maggie wasn't there to witness it. She didn't need to be. But Lily called her that evening, voice hushed. "Grandma, they arrested Mom." She was screaming. Dad looked like he didn't know whether to throw up or run. Maggie paused, her tone gentle. "You okay?" "I think so. I didn't think it would go this far. It went this far the moment they tried to make me invisible," Maggie replied. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she tried to say it was your fault, but nobody believed her, not even Dad. Maggie exhaled. That part hit harder than expected. "I'm sorry you had to see it," she said. "I'm not," Lily whispered. "You told the truth." And they finally had to sit with it. Later that night, Maggie stood in Roy's study and placed the forged referral in a new file labeled obstruction. It sat next to folders marked fraud assets and reclaimed. Her organizational habits were old school but necessary. Each file represented a line crossed, a warning issued. She poured a glass of water, walked to the living room window, and watched the sky go dark. It was quiet. No sirens, no footsteps, no more false letters shoved under doors. Just silence. Not peace, yet. But the beginning of it. The next morning, Walter texted her a short update: charges filed, arraignment scheduled. She'll likely take a plea. Maggie responded with one word: good. She didn't need to celebrate. She didn't need apologies. All she needed was for the truth to keep doing its work. She made a pot of coffee and sat on the porch, sipping slowly as the sun rose over the trees. In her lap was a notebook filled with next steps, final account closures, property transfers, donations to the women's legal aid fund she'd been quietly supporting. Because while Reese was busy plotting fake evaluations, Maggie had been planning a legacy. Not one built on inheritance, but one earned from holding the line. News traveled fast in their neighborhood, the kind of suburb where window shades moved just enough to keep secrets and gossip alive. Maggie didn't need to be present the day Reese was taken into custody. The silence from her children told her everything. But later that evening, Lily called again. Her voice was shaking this time, not with fear, but something rawer. Disbelief. She screamed all the way down the driveway. Lily said, "Mom." She didn't even try to act normal. Just lost it, cussing at the officers, yelling about conspiracies. Maggie closed her eyes and let the image settle in her mind. Reese, in her pristine white sweater dress mascara, running wrists cuffed in front of the same neighbors she used to wave to like royalty. "And Dad?" Maggie asked. Lily exhaled. He just stood there. Didn't say a word. Not even when the sheriff asked if he wanted to call a lawyer. Maggie said nothing for a moment. Then, that silence is the first true thing he's done in years. The next day, the local paper published a small blurb in the Crime Digest. Margaret Reese Hale, 43, charged with 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraud. Allegations include falsified court documents and attempted abuse of legal process. It was printed next to a grocery store theft and a bar brawl, but Maggie clipped it anyway, not out of spite, out of closure. By mid-afternoon, Daniel tried calling, twice. She didn't answer. Then Trevor rang. Maggie stared at the screen before finally picking up. His voice was hesitant, like someone stepping onto a frozen lake they weren't sure could hold their weight. "Mom, I didn't know she was going to do that. I know. I would have stopped her if I had. You didn't stop anything when she told me to stay quiet at dinner, Trev." He sighed long and low. "I thought things would settle down, that she was just being emotional. She tried to strip my rights using a forged medical document. That's not emotional, Trevor. That's criminal." I know he said quieter now. You let it happen. You watched her walk over me in front of our whole family and didn't say a word. Trevor's breath caught. "You're right. I'm not looking for an apology," Maggie continued. "I'm looking for people who know how to take accountability. That's the only currency that matters to me now." There was a long silence on the line. Then he asked, "Do you want me to come by?" "No, Trevor." She said not, unkindly. "It's too late for a porch visit." Click. She stared at the phone for a moment after the call ended. Her heart didn't race. Her palms didn't sweat. What she felt was clarity, sharp, clean, and irreversible. By the end of the week, Walter sent confirmation that Reese had taken a plea. No trial, no courtroom drama, just a quiet admission in exchange for a lighter sentence. She would pay a fine and be restricted from any estate involvement for 5 years. Her record would bear the scar of fraud for the rest of her life. Daniel, on the other hand, had gone dark. No texts, no calls. Maggie imagined him sitting at their kitchen table, seething into his morning coffee, furious at the loss of control. But there was no redemption arc here. No, it was all a misunderstanding. The paper trail was too deep, the betrayal too blatant, and the court didn't care about charm. That Sunday, Maggie received a handwritten letter. The return address was Trevor's. It wasn't long, just a folded page with 8 sentences. The words were messy, hurried but heartfelt. Mom, I was weak. I let them treat you like a ghost, and I knew better. You raised us better. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to hear this from me, not a phone or a lawyer or anyone else. I was wrong. You deserved more. I'm sorry. I hope someday I can do something right by you. She read it twice, folded it neatly, placed it in Roy's old desk drawer with the others, the legal files, the financial statements. And now this, the first real thing Trevor had said in years. She didn't cry. She just breathed long and deep, letting it settle somewhere far beneath the bruises. Later that evening, Lily stopped by unannounced. She carried a plastic grocery bag and a look of quiet resolve. I brought your favorite crackers, she said, and the lemon curd. Maggie opened the door wide. Come in, sweetheart. They sat at the kitchen table quietly, spreading curd on crackers, drinking tea in mismatched mugs. Lily didn't ask questions. Maggie didn't give speeches. But as they sat side by side, Maggie finally spoke. They thought I wouldn't fight back. Lily looked up. They forgot I built this house, Maggie said, and I don't let termites live in it. The air was crisp that morning, quiet, sharp, honest. Maggie stood on the porch of the yellow-shuttered cottage, just outside town, the one she and Roy had bought years ago as a fixer-upper, and rented out to traveling nurses and weekend writers. It wasn't much, but it had charm, a creaky porch swing ivy curling up the chimney, and a sloped garden path Roy had stubbornly paved himself with second-hand stones. She looked down at the envelope in her hand, Lily's name written in steady pen. Inside was a deed. Lily's car pulled up slowly, cautious, like she wasn't sure she was meant to be there. Maggie waved her up the steps. You didn't say what this was about. Lily said a little breathless as she got out. I thought, maybe you needed help with the garden. Maggie smiled. Not quite. Come inside. The living room still smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. Maggie had cleaned it herself that morning. She led Lily to the small dining table, then placed the envelope down between them. This is for you, she said. Lily stared at it. What is it? Open it. She did. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the deed from the envelope and read her name in bold print across the top. I don't understand. It's yours now, Maggie said. Free and clear. I had the transfer filed last week. Lily blinked hard, clearly, trying not to cry. Grandma, I can't. This is too much. I didn't earn. Maggie reached across the table and put a hand over hers. You didn't betray me. You didn't look the other way. That's all I needed. You're the only one in this family who never treated me like a burden. Lily shook her head, tears spilling now. I don't deserve this. You do, Maggie said firmly, because you didn't pretend. You saw what was happening and didn't look away. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them. Outside, the wind rustled the old oak tree, scattering gold leaves across the gravel driveway. Eventually, Lily looked up. So what now? Maggie smiled. Now, we build something better. That evening, Maggie sat at her kitchen table back home with Walter Barnes on speakerphone and a nonprofit consultant on Zoom. She outlined her plan with crisp bullet points and legal clarity. I'm calling it the Hale Legacy Fund, she said, a grant for widowed women over 60 who've been left in the financial dark after their husbands pass. especially the ones who've been pushed out, written off, or told to sit down and stay quiet. Walter chuckled softly. Where do you get that idea? Personal experience, Maggie said dryly. The consultant leaned forward on screen. It's a brilliant concept. Impact-driven high need. Do you have seed money in mind? $250,000 to start, Maggie replied. Liquidated assets from the cabin vendor equipment and the business inventory Daniel thought he'd inherit. The consultant's eyebrows lifted. That's substantial. We can do a lot of good with that. That's the idea, Maggie said. I don't need plaques. I just want something that outlives this mess. 2 weeks later, the fund went live. Before the website even finished loading on its first day, the application started rolling in emails, handwritten letters, scanned PDFs, sent from library computers. One stood out a note from a woman in Kentucky whose children had drained her accounts within days of their father's funeral. She wrote, I didn't know what I was allowed to ask for. I've never signed a check without someone watching me. I just need help getting a grip on my life again. Maggie approved her application in under 2 hours. That night, she poured a glass of wine and pulled Roy's old fleece blanket over her lap. On the coffee table sat a small photo of them taken 20 years ago at a roadside diner, both of them laughing at something that had since been lost to time. You were right, she murmured. They came for it. But I was ready. Later, while organizing the last of the estate documents, she found a note tucked between the pages of Roy's retirement binder. It was written on the back of a dry cleaning receipt in his familiar handwriting. Make sure Maggie knows she did it all. I just stood beside her. She didn't cry. She folded the note gently, placed it in the top drawer of his desk beside the keys, and smiled. This wasn't just a win. It was the beginning of a new fight, one she would now wage on behalf of women like her, for every voice that had ever been told it was too late, too emotional, too just the widow. Maggie Hale had reclaimed her life, and she wasn't done yet. The process wasn't glamorous. It never is when you're cleaning rot out of the beams. Maggie spent weeks liquidating assets, cabin leases, inventory lists, rental agreements disguised as gifts from Daniel's so-called business. She worked with Walter the accountant and a real estate attorney to track down every title with her name on it and every loophole the family had tried to crawl through. The cabin Blake once called his weekend sanctuary was sold within days. The lake property long flaunted on social media as a Hale legacy retreat went next. Then came the downtown condo Trevor had been quietly renting out, pocketing the cash. Maggie filed the paperwork, issued eviction notices, and signed transfer deeds with steady hands and a quiet resolve. Daniel's business account was drained legally, every penny tied to fraudulent loans, repurposed into the Hale Legacy Fund. Candace's cards were cut off mid-purchase during what must have been a very loud scene at the Westport boutique. Trevor, always the least vocal, but equally complicit, found his utilities, and rent bouncing back when Maggie closed the trust-linked accounts. They didn't come back yelling this time. They were scrambling. Maggie received no phone calls from Daniel, no long-winded texts, just silence. A silence she suspected was fueled more by humiliation than reflection. Reese's court-ordered silence agreement was still in effect. And Trevor sent one more letter, a simple thank you for not pressing charges. Nothing more. She didn't reply. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It wasn't about watching them fall. It was about removing their shadows from the house Roy built with his hands, and Maggie held together with hers. When it was all finished, Maggie sat across from Walter, one final time in his office, now stuffed with boxes of records, and a tired-looking fern she had gifted him 15 years ago. "You now hold sole control of every major asset," he said, closing the last folder. "It's done." Maggie nodded. "Good. I want them to learn what it's like to live without scaffolding." Walter leaned back in his chair. "And you?" "What's next for you, I rest," she said. "I plant flowers. I read. I live in a house where the floorboards don't echo with other people's entitlement." The following week, a final invitation arrived, another family meeting, this time sent by Daniel himself. The email was awkwardly polite, calling it a reconnection dinner. Maggie smirked at the wording. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement. Just a thin Band-Aid tossed over a bullet wound. She went, not to heal, but to finish. The dining table was the same one she had bought for them as a gift. They sat awkwardly, Daniel looking drained, Reese absent by court order. Trevor hunched near the end like he'd shrunk in spirit. Lily was already there, seated next to Maggie, a calm presence among the wreckage. Daniel stood at the head, clearly rehearsed. "Families go through things," he began. "Tensions rise. But we should find our way back." Maggie raised a hand palm out, cutting him off gently but firmly. "This isn't a storm," she said. "It's the consequence. And every one of you wrote it. No one moved." She looked at each of them, her voice low but unshakable. "You told me I was just the widow. You asked me to be quiet in a house I paid for. You planned to divide what Roy and I built like it was your birthright." Daniel shifted in his chair. "I wasn't quiet when I built this family. I wasn't quiet when I held it together. And I won't be quiet now that I've taken it back." She let that hang in the air. "This room, this table, this legacy, it belongs to me now. Legally, emotionally, structurally. And you're all guests here. Remember that." Trevor opened his mouth, but Maggie stood before he could speak. "I'm not here to forgive. I'm not here to argue. I'm here because people who try to erase you need to see you standing tall." She turned to Lily. "Let's go." They walked out together, quiet but firm. The door clicked shut behind them. The sky outside was clear, painted in soft pastels. Maggie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 30 years finally shift off her shoulders. Back home, she brewed herself a fresh cup of tea, took it to the porch and sat beneath the morning sun. Her garden was blooming soft yellows, deep purples, honest greens. She wasn't bitter. She was free. No longer silenced. No longer small. Just Maggie Hale, woman, widow, warrior, and builder of it all.